My name is Marcus Thompson, and I've been farming in Iowa my entire 28 years. Growing up on my family's 200-acre operation, I learned early that success in agriculture comes from hard work, smart decisions, and sometimes a little bit of luck. What I didn't expect was that my biggest break would come from what everyone else saw as a pile of junk. It was a humid Saturday morning in June when I first laid eyes on the old John Deere. I'd driven to an estate sale about 30 miles from our farm, hoping to find some used equipment that might help me expand my operation. My brother Jake had inherited the family farm when Dad passed, and I was trying to build something of my own on the 40 acres Dad had left me. The tractor sat in the back corner of a weathered barn, covered in dust and rust, looking like it hadn't run in decades. The paint was faded and peeling, the tires were flat, and weeds had grown up around the wheels. Most people walked right past it without a second glance. But something about that old machine caught my attention. It was a 1960s model, the kind my grandfather used to talk about with reverence. These tractors were built to last, engineered with a simplicity and durability that modern machines sometimes lacked. The auctioneer barely bothered to describe it when the bidding started. "Old John Deere sold as is, no guarantees," he announced. The opening bid was $50, and for several minutes nobody raised a hand. I found myself bidding almost without thinking. 50, then 100, then 200. When the hammer fell at $300, I was the only bidder left standing. The auctioneer looked surprised that anyone had wanted it at all. As I arranged for transport, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just made either the best decision of my life or the worst mistake. Chapter 2. The Mockery. Loading that rusted hulk onto my trailer was harder than I'd expected. The tractor was heavier than it looked, and several mechanical parts had seized from years of neglect. By the time I got it home, word had already spread through our small farming community about my investment. Jake was waiting for me when I pulled into my yard, arms crossed and wearing the expression he'd perfected since childhood. The look that said his little brother had done something stupid again. $300, Marcus? Really? He walked around the trailer shaking his head. For this piece of junk? You could have bought a decent used plow for that money. I tried to explain my reasoning, but even to my own ears, it sounded weak. The tractor needed extensive work, parts would be expensive, and there was no guarantee I could even get it running. Jake's skepticism was entirely reasonable. Our neighbor, Bill Henderson, stopped by that afternoon and had an even harsher assessment. "Son, I've been farming for 40 years, and I can tell you that machine is beyond saving. You'd be better off selling it for scrap metal and cutting your losses." Even my girlfriend Sarah, usually supportive of my farming ambitions, seemed concerned. "Marcus, honey, we've talked about being careful with money. $300 might not sound like much, but..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. I knew our financial situation as well as anyone. The 40 acres I was trying to farm were mortgaged to the hilt, and every dollar mattered. Spending my emergency fund on a tractor that might never run again was exactly the kind of impulsive decision that could sink a struggling operation. But despite the criticism, I couldn't shake the feeling that everyone was missing something important. There was potential in that old machine, something that went beyond its current condition. That night, I lay awake planning how I would restore it, imagining the satisfaction of proving everyone wrong. Chapter 3. The restoration begins. The next morning, I started the long process of bringing the John Deere back to life. I'd learned basic mechanics from Dad, but this project would test every skill I'd ever developed. The engine was seized, the hydraulics were shot, and half the electrical system had been chewed by mice. I began by stripping away decades of accumulated grime and rust. Each component revealed new problems: cracked gaskets, corroded fittings, worn bearings that would need replacement. The parts list grew longer every day, and the costs mounted accordingly. Jake stopped by regularly, ostensibly to help but mostly to remind me how much money I was throwing away. "You're up to $600 in parts already," he pointed out during one visit. "For that much, you could have bought a working tractor." He wasn't wrong, but I'd committed to seeing the project through. There was something almost meditative about the work: cleaning, repairing, slowly bringing order to chaos. Each small victory, like freeing a stuck piston or replacing a corroded wire, felt like progress toward something larger. The breakthrough came when I finally got the engine to turn over. It took 3 weeks of work, countless hours of troubleshooting, and more money than I cared to calculate. But when that old diesel engine coughed to life for the first time in decades, the sound was beautiful. Jake happened to be there when it happened, and I saw his expression change from skepticism to grudging respect. "Well, I'll be damned," he said. "You actually got it running." But running was just the beginning. The real test would come when I put the tractor to work in my fields. I had 40 acres of corn to plant, and this old machine would either prove its worth or confirm everyone's worst predictions about my judgment. The planting season was approaching fast, and I was running out of time to get everything ready. Chapter 4. The First Test. Spring planting season arrived with its usual urgency. Every farmer in Iowa knows that timing is everything. Plant too early and risk frost damage, plant too late and miss the optimal growing window. I had a narrow opportunity to prove that my restored John Deere could handle real work. The tractor looked impressive after months of restoration. I'd repainted it in the classic John Deere green and yellow, replaced worn parts, and tuned the engine until it purred like a contented cat. But appearance meant nothing if it couldn't perform in the field. My first test was disking the 40 acres I planned to plant in corn. The old tractor pulled my disc harrow without strain, the engine maintaining steady power even in the heaviest soil. The hydraulics responded smoothly, and the transmission shifted cleanly through all its gears. Jake watched from his own field, occasionally glancing over to see how I was managing. I could tell he was surprised by how well the old machine was performing, though he'd never admit it directly. The real test came during planting. I'd borrowed a 4-row planter from a neighbor, and the John Deere would need to maintain precise speeds and consistent power to ensure proper seed spacing. Modern tractors had computer-controlled systems for this kind of precision work, but my restored machine relied on the operator's skill and the tractor's mechanical reliability. For 3 days, I worked from dawn to dusk, planting corn with methodical precision. The old tractor never missed a beat, maintaining steady power and smooth operation hour after hour. By the time I finished, I'd planted all 40 acres without a single mechanical problem. Jake stopped by that evening as I was cleaning up. "I have to admit, Marcus, that old tractor is performing better than I expected. You might actually know what you're doing." It was the closest thing to a compliment I'd gotten from him in years. But the real test was still ahead. Growing the corn would determine whether my investment had been worthwhile. Chapter 5. The Growing Season. The weeks following planting were filled with the usual anxieties of farming. Would there be enough rain? Too much rain? Would the corn emerge evenly? Every farmer knows that planting is just the beginning. Mother Nature controls everything that happens next. My corn emerged right on schedule, tiny green shoots pushing through the soil in perfectly straight rows. The old John Deere had done its job well, placing each seed at the optimal depth and spacing. But as the season progressed, I began to notice something unusual about my crop. The corn in my field was growing faster and stronger than anything I'd seen before. By mid-July, when the plants should have been knee-high, mine were already waist-deep. The stalks were thick and healthy, with a deep green color that indicated excellent nutrition uptake. Jake noticed it too during one of his regular visits. "Your corn looks good, Marcus. Really good. What are you doing differently this year?" I honestly didn't know. I was using the same seed variety as previous years, the same fertilizer program, the same cultivation practices. The only variable was the old John Deere, but that seemed like a ridiculous explanation. Our neighbor, Bill Henderson, was even more puzzled. "Son, I've been farming this area for 40 years, and I've never seen corn grow like that on your ground. That field always struggled with drainage and nutrient deficiency. What's your secret?" I wished I had an answer, but the truth was that I was as mystified as everyone else. The corn continued to grow at an unprecedented rate, reaching heights that defied explanation. By August, the stalks towered over my head, thick as fence posts and heavy with developing ears. Word began to spread through the farming community about the remarkable crop growing on the Thompson place. People started driving by just to see it for themselves, and agricultural extension agents began asking questions about my method. But I was beginning to suspect that the answer lay not in what I was doing, but in what the old tractor was somehow contributing to the process. Chapter 6. The Investigation. As my corn continued its extraordinary growth, I became obsessed with understanding why. I started researching everything I could find about the specific model of John Deere I'd restored, looking for clues that might explain the unusual results I was seeing. The tractor was a 1965 model 4020, part of a series that John Deere had manufactured during a period of rapid technological advancement. But as I dug deeper into the history, I discovered something interesting about the particular unit I'd bought. According to the serial number, my tractor had been part of a limited production run that John Deere had used for field testing experimental technologies. Only 50 tractors in this series had been built, and they'd been distributed to select farms across the Midwest for evaluation purposes. The previous owner, an elderly farmer named Harold Brennan, had participated in this testing program. According to records I found at the county extension office, Brennan had reported unusual crop yields during the years he used the experimental tractor, but the reports had been dismissed as anomalous data. I decided to visit Harold's widow, Margaret, who still lived in the farmhouse where the estate sale had been held. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her 80s who remembered the tractor well. "Oh, yes, that old John Deere," she said when I explained my visit. "Harold always said there was something special about that machine. Our corn yields were consistently 20% higher than our neighbors during the years he used it. Did he ever figure out why?" Margaret smiled mysteriously. "Harold had his theories, but nobody would listen to an old farmer's crazy ideas. He thought John Deere had built something into that tractor that they never told anyone about." "What kind of something?" "You'd have to ask Harold, but he's been gone 3 years now. All I know is that when he stopped using that tractor, our yields went back to normal. We always wondered what would happen if someone else tried farming with it." I left Margaret's house with more questions than answers, but convinced that I was on the right track. Chapter 7. The Discovery. Determined to solve the mystery, I began a systematic examination of every component on the restored tractor. I was looking for anything unusual, any modification or addition that might explain its apparent effect on crop yields. The breakthrough came when I was cleaning the fuel system. Hidden beneath the main fuel tank, I found a smaller secondary tank that I'd somehow missed during the restoration. It was connected to the main fuel line through a complex series of valves and injectors that seemed far more sophisticated than anything that should have been on a 1960s tractor. The secondary tank contained a small amount of liquid that didn't look or smell like diesel fuel. It was clear and odorless, with a slightly oily consistency. More importantly, there was a small metal plate attached to the tank with technical specifications and a warning label that made my blood run cold. Experimental Soil Enhancement System. Classified, authorized personnel only. The plate included a John Deere part number that didn't match any standard catalog, along with a date stamp from 1965. Below that was a chemical formula that meant nothing to me, but looked complex enough to be significant. I realized I'd stumbled onto something that John Deere had apparently wanted to keep secret. The experimental tractor wasn't just testing mechanical improvements, it was testing some kind of chemical soil treatment system that was being applied automatically as the tractor worked. That evening, I called Jake and asked him to come over. When I showed him what I'd found, his skepticism finally gave way to genuine amazement. "Marcus, do you realize what this means? If this stuff actually improves soil fertility, and you're the only one who has it." I was beginning to understand the implications, but I was also worried about what I'd gotten myself into. If this technology was classified, using it might not be legal, and if it was as effective as my corn crop suggested, there were probably people who would want to know about it. Chapter 8. The Analysis. I knew I needed professional help to understand what I'd discovered, but I was reluctant to involve too many people until I knew more about the legal implications. I decided to start with Dr. Emily Chen, a soil scientist at Iowa State University who had helped me with fertility issues in the past. Dr. Chen agreed to analyze a sample of the mysterious liquid, though I was deliberately vague about where it had come from. I told her only that I'd found it in some old farm equipment and was curious about its composition. The results came back 2 weeks later, and Dr. Chen's excitement was obvious when she called. "Marcus, where exactly did you find this sample? This is unlike anything I've seen before." "What is it?" "It appears to be a highly concentrated blend of micronutrients, growth hormones, and what I can only describe as synthetic soil bacteria. The complexity is extraordinary. This would have required sophisticated biochemical engineering to develop. Is it safe? As far as I can tell, yes. In fact, it's brilliant. The synthetic bacteria are designed to form symbiotic relationships with crop roots, dramatically improving nutrient uptake efficiency. The growth hormones are plant-specific and biodegradable. Whoever developed this was decades ahead of their time. Dr. Chen paused before continuing. Marcus, if this formula could be reproduced and commercialized, it would revolutionize agriculture. We're talking about potential yield increases of 30 to 40% with no negative environmental impact. I thanked her for the analysis and hung up, my mind racing. I was sitting on agricultural technology that was apparently worth millions, maybe billions of dollars, but I still didn't know who had developed it or why it had been hidden away in an experimental tractor for 60 years. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to find out the truth about what John Deere had been working on in 1965 and why they'd apparently abandoned such promising technology. Chapter 9. The Research. My investigation into John Deere's experimental programs led me down a rabbit hole of corporate history, government contracts, and Cold War-era agricultural research that I'd never imagined existed. What I discovered was that the 1960s had been a period of intense competition between American and Soviet agricultural technology. The U.S. Department of Agriculture had funded numerous classified research projects aimed at developing agricultural advantages that could be used in the global struggle for influence. John Deere had been one of several companies contracted to develop enhanced farming systems that could dramatically increase crop yields in developing nations. The project my tractor had been part of was called Green Revolution Plus, and it had been designed to create agricultural technology so advanced that it would give American-backed nations decisive advantages in food production. The soil enhancement system I'd discovered was apparently the crown jewel of this research. But according to the documents I found in government archives, the project had been abruptly terminated in 1966. The official reason was budget constraints, but reading between the lines suggested that something more significant had happened. I found a reference to Dr. Robert Kellerman, the lead scientist on the project, in a 1967 agricultural journal. He'd left John Deere shortly after the project ended and had spent the rest of his career working for small biotechnology companies. More importantly, he was still alive and living in a retirement community in Cedar Falls. Dr. Kellerman was 91 years old, but still sharp when I visited him. When I explained what I'd found and showed him photos of the secondary tank system, his eyes lit up with recognition and something that looked like relief. I wondered what had happened to those test units, he said. We built 50 of them, but when the project was canceled, John Deere was supposed to retrieve all the equipment and destroy it. Why was the project canceled? Dr. Kellerman's expression grew somber. Because it worked too well. The yield increases were so dramatic that agricultural economists warned it could destabilize global food markets. The technology was classified and buried to prevent economic chaos. Chapter 10. The Truth. Dr. Kellerman invited me to stay for dinner, and over the course of the evening, he told me the complete story of Green Revolution Plus. What I learned was both fascinating and troubling. The soil enhancement system had been designed to work in conjunction with specific genetic modifications in crop seeds. The synthetic bacteria would form colonies around plant roots, creating microenvironments that dramatically accelerated growth and nutrient absorption. The system was so effective that test plots had produced yields that were sometimes double normal expectations. We thought we were going to end world hunger, Dr. Kellerman explained. The technology could have transformed agriculture in developing nations, made food scarcity a thing of the past. So why was it really canceled? Politics and economics. The major agricultural corporations realized that if this technology became widely available, it would destroy their business models. Farmers wouldn't need expensive fertilizers or pesticides. Seed companies would lose their monopolies on high-yield varieties. Dr. Kellerman paused, staring out his window at the Iowa countryside. There were also concerns about what would happen to American agricultural exports if every country could suddenly produce surplus food. The economic implications were staggering. What happened to the research? Officially, it was all destroyed. The test tractors were supposed to be recalled and dismantled, the formulas were classified beyond top secret, and everyone involved was required to sign non-disclosure agreements that are probably still in effect. But my tractor was never recalled. Apparently not. Harold Brennan was a stubborn old farmer who didn't trust government officials. When they came to collect his test tractor, he told them it had been destroyed in a barn fire. He hid it away and kept using the enhancement system for his own crops. Dr. Kellerman looked at me seriously. Marcus, you need to understand what you've stumbled into. That technology is still classified, and there are people who would go to great lengths to keep it from becoming public knowledge. I was beginning to realize that my $300 tractor purchase had put me in possession of one of the most valuable agricultural secrets in history. Chapter 11. The Decision. The harvest season arrived with its usual intensity, but this year was different. My 40 acres of corn had produced a crop that defied belief. The yields were so extraordinary that I had to rent additional storage space just to handle the volume. When the final numbers were calculated, my corn production was 43% higher than the county average, despite using standard farming practices on ground that had historically been marginal. The financial impact was immediate and dramatic. I earned more from those 40 acres than Jake had made from his entire 200-acre operation. Word of my success spread quickly through the farming community. Agricultural reporters began calling, seed company representatives wanted to know what variety I'd planted, and equipment dealers were curious about my cultivation methods. But I knew the real reason for my success, and I was faced with an impossible decision. Dr. Kellerman had made it clear that the technology was still classified and that revealing it could have serious legal consequences, but keeping it secret felt wrong when it could potentially help farmers around the world. Jake was pressing me for answers. Marcus, you've got to tell me what you're doing differently. This kind of yield increase doesn't just happen by accident. I wanted to tell him everything, but I was afraid of the consequences. If word got out about the enhancement system, I could face federal charges for possessing classified technology. But if I kept it secret, I'd be sitting on a solution to agricultural problems that affected millions of people. The decision was made for me when Dr. Chen called with disturbing news. Marcus, I've been thinking about that sample you had me analyze. I've been getting calls from people asking about my research. Government people. I think someone knows what you found. That evening, a black sedan pulled into my driveway. Two men in suits got out and asked to speak with me about agricultural research activities I might be conducting. I knew my secret was out. Chapter 12. The Confrontation. The two federal agents were polite but firm. They identified themselves as representatives of the Department of Agriculture's Office of Inspector General, and they were investigating reports of unauthorized use of classified agricultural technology. Mr. Thompson, we have reason to believe you may have come into possession of materials related to a classified research project from the 1960s. We need to ask you some questions. I decided that honesty was my best option. I told them about buying the tractor, discovering the secondary tank system, and having the liquid analyzed. I explained that I'd had no idea the technology was classified when I'd started using it. The lead agent, a serious man named Davidson, listened without interruption. When I finished, he asked to see the tractor and the enhancement system. Mr. Thompson, you've stumbled onto one of the most closely guarded agricultural secrets in American history. This technology has been classified for nearly 60 years, and its unauthorized use is a federal crime. I didn't know it was classified. I was just trying to restore an old tractor. We understand that, and it's why you're not under arrest. But we need to discuss your options going forward. Agent Davidson explained that I had three choices. I could surrender the tractor and all related materials to the government, face prosecution for unauthorized possession of classified technology, or work with them to find a solution that served everyone's interests. What kind of solution? The classification on this technology is being reviewed. There's growing recognition that keeping it secret may no longer serve the national interest. Climate change and global food security have changed the equation. Davidson paused before continuing. We'd like to propose a partnership. You continue using the technology under government oversight, document its effects, and help us develop protocols for eventual public release. It wasn't the outcome I'd expected, but it offered a path forward that didn't involve prison or losing everything I'd worked for. Jake arrived as the agents were leaving, and I finally told him the whole story. His reaction was everything I'd hoped for. "Marcus, you crazy son of a bitch. You bought a $300 tractor and accidentally became part of a government conspiracy." Chapter 13. The Legacy. 2 years have passed since that confrontation in my driveway, and my life has changed in ways I never could have imagined. Working with the Department of Agriculture, I've become part of a pilot program to test the gradual release of Green Revolution Plus technology to American farmers. My 40 acres have become a demonstration site where agricultural scientists from around the world come to study the enhancement system's effects. The yields have remained consistently extraordinary, and we've documented improvements in soil health that suggest long-term benefits beyond just increased production. Jake has joined the program, retrofitting his own equipment with enhancement systems and documenting results across different soil types and crop varieties. Our combined operations have become a model for sustainable high-yield agriculture that's attracting international attention. The old John Deere still sits in my equipment shed, now recognized as a piece of agricultural history. Dr. Kellerman visits occasionally, amazed that his life's work is finally seeing the light of day. He's become something of a celebrity in agricultural circles, the scientist whose buried research may help feed the world. But perhaps the most satisfying change has been in my relationship with Jake. The brother who once mocked my $300 investment now treats me as an equal partner in our family's farming operation. We're planning to expand the demonstration program and eventually establish a research foundation dedicated to developing sustainable agricultural technologies. The enhancement system is still classified, but that's changing. Government officials have indicated that limited public release may begin within the next 5 years, starting with developing nations facing food security challenges. Sometimes I think about that Saturday morning when I first saw the rusted tractor in Harold Brennan's barn. Everyone thought I was crazy to spend my last $300 on what looked like junk, but sometimes the biggest opportunities come disguised as the worst ideas. The old John Deere taught me that value isn't always visible on the surface, that innovation can be hidden in the most unlikely places, and that sometimes the best investments are the ones that everyone else thinks are mistakes. Thank you for listening to my story. It's been an incredible journey from that first day when everyone laughed at my rusted-out tractor purchase to where we are now, potentially changing agriculture for the better. I'd love to hear from listeners around the world. Please let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and whether you've ever made an investment that everyone thought was crazy but turned out to be brilliant. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories about taking risks, following your instincts, and discovering that sometimes the most valuable things are hiding in plain sight.